For your ears only for the week of December 23rd, I'm David Alpern.
I'm Eddie Robinson.
We gather in such a moment of heartbreak for all of us here in Newtown. We gather especially mindful of family and friends and neighbors among us who have lost loved ones by an act of unfathomable violence and destruction.
The fact that we can't prevent every act of violence doesn't mean we can't steadily reduce the violence and prevent the very worst violence.
If we truly cherish our kids more than our money, more than our celebrities, more than our sports stadiums, we must give them the greatest level of protection possible. And that security is only available with properly trained, armed good guys.
All week long, the clergy of Newtown, Connecticut, their parishioners, neighbors, and friends held memorial and funeral services for the 20 children and 7 adults killed by a local loner who also killed himself. And the massacre fueled continuing debate far beyond on how the nation should respond. President Obama launched a task force to consider new controls on assault-style weapons and high-capacity ammunition holders, as well as better mental health provisions and background checks before gun sales. And after a week of silence, Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association demanded an armed security guard at every American school, offered NRA help to create the system, and called on Congress to pay for it.
LaPierre also blamed violence in the culture, fostered by bloody movies, TV, and computer games, exalted by extensive media coverage. To consider all these factors for your ears only, we're joined again by Dr. Gregory Jantz, psychologist, addictions therapist, and author of When Your Teenager Becomes the Stranger in Your House from Cook Publishing. It can be downloaded free of charge on December 28th and 29th from Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, Google, and other ebook sites. Welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you today.
LaPierre is certainly right that we put security at stadiums, political, and major entertainment events, but didn't we see an armed guard unable to stop the school shooting at Columbine in 1999? And would more guns in schools make kids feel more or less safe?
From my vantage point, it creates more anxiety. It communicates that this is not a safe place. And as well, we've got situations that we've already shown that a shooter's going to come in and do what they're going to do, whether there's an armed guard there or not. I think it could increase the potential for violence.
LaPierre also called for a databank of people with mental health problems. But can you see practical definitions that would highlight those really likely to explode?
No, one of the things in mental illness we look at on a continuum from, if you will, mild to severe. Some point you cross that line to severe, and we use terms like schizophrenia, psychotic. What we're not good at is predicting a person's behavior, what they'll do, and when. We cannot predict.
Many kids with autism or Asperger's syndrome, maybe including the Newtown shooter, are also often loners, socially isolated and frustrated. But most experts say there's no evidence that they're more likely than others to turn violent. Are you confident about that?
Yes, the autism, Asperger's, and we look at this on, again, a continuum, the probability that we could say that this person would be a violent person is really, really rare. The research just does not substantiate that if you have an autism spectrum diagnosis that you're going to be a violent person.
With or without autism in the picture, what are the signs of potential violence that parents, friends, and neighbors should look for in kids, young adults, anyone?
One of the things we need to be aware of is the rise of teenage depression. About right under 10% of our teenagers probably fall in a category of what we'll call clinical depression. We look for isolation, which is always a sign of despair, and we understand that a teenager in despair is unpredictable in their behavior. So I'm looking for patterns, a change in academics, a change in peer group, a person who's no longer doing hygiene appropriately. And then I'm also looking for a young person that feels persecuted. That's probably one of the highest indicators.
New York police say they will explore monitoring the internet for exchanges or postings that include hints of violence, maybe with a special algorithm. As an expert on the psychology of new technology, do you think this is likely to be effective, overwhelmed by all the traffic, overly intrusive?
It will not be effective. I'm comforted to know that we can monitor and be aware of inappropriate communications. And this is particularly important when we look at predators and those that are looking for children and those kinds of issues. But people speak in code. Texting has its own language that is primarily known to use that speak in code. And that, language changes, and there'll be different ways of communicating. The other thing that we know is typically a person who's going to go to a violent behavior is they're not communicating that. It's usually very strategically planned, and so they're not communicating anything that's going to reveal that until they decide when.
And then there's the question of what to do. We hear the mother of the Newtown shooter was having an increasingly difficult time managing him and was the first victim of his shooting spree with guns that she had purchased legally for safety and sport. When and how do you call in medical professionals or the police in what you think is a child or adult's best interests?
That's a very good question, and we have the privilege of working with individuals from all over the country who come in for help. And one of the things that we hear from parents, and they'll say, I knew all along, or I knew something was wrong. I wish I would have listened to myself. So we hear a lot of regret. So my advice to the parent is trust your intuition. If you know your child, and I spoke with a mother just yesterday who said, you know what, I'm concerned that I may have a young man, my son, who's acting unpredictable. I'm concerned that he could do something. And just to be able to reach out and to talk about that. We also then need to look at a teenager needs to get at some point the proper help. A depressed teenager, a teenager feeling persecuted, ultimately will do something.
What's your feeling about the impact of violent films, TV, and video games?
There's kind of mixed reviews as far as the research on this. My personal position, and I am a father of two young men, one a teenager, and we've had to come to some decisions about games that we're going to allow. One of my concerns is the realism and the first-person shooter games that we see. I think that it creates probably a desensitization to what's actually going on. We know that boys will, no matter what culture they're in, they'll create a weapon, a stick for a gun. It's universal among boys. But we do not, we don't need to be putting more ideas. I'm concerned for the teenager that is obsessed with the games, spends an enormous amount of time on screen time, and without boundaries in the home and decisions. I think it can be a problem.
Dr. Gregory Jantz is a psychologist and addictions therapist at aplaceofhope.com and author of When Your Teenager Becomes the Stranger in Your House from Cook Publishing. It will be able to be downloaded free on December 28th and 29th from Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, Google, and other ebook sites.
Quote from the news, "The regime especially hates us." That was Yasser al-Haji of a town in Syria, home of a major rebel commander, and which last week became the first target of the Assad government's devastating Russian-made cluster bombs. Moscow, meanwhile, dispatched a naval squadron for possible evacuation of Russian nationals from the war-torn country.
Next, games Washington plays on guns, the fiscal cliff, and more for your ears only.